Hi, my name's Suzie, and I'm one of the pastors who helps to oversee our groups at HTB. Welcome to session 4 of our resource on Jonah, where we discover God's faithfulness through the story of Jonah. To recap what we've looked at over the last 3 sessions, in session 1, we saw that God sometimes asks us to do hard things. And these hard things come at a cost to us personally. They can cost us our time, our convenience, and our opinions. And we're often tempted to run in the opposite direction. But as we see in the story of Jonah, even when we run, God remains present. In session 2, we learn how to navigate moments of crisis in our lives and discover God's faithfulness in the midst of them. And in session 3, we saw just how merciful and compassionate God is, even to those who we think don't deserve it. In this session, we'll explore chapter 4 of Jonah, where all of the pieces come together. And we'll see through the story of Jonah just how different God's response to people can be from our own response to people. You can pause the video here to pray, to invite the Holy Spirit, and to read chapter 4 together as a group. Jonah has just seen an entire city transformed. Even the cows repented. And yet, Jonah is fuming mad. We see Jonah tell God why he ran away in the first place. And it wasn't because he was afraid. Rather, it was because he knew that God was so merciful. Jonah quotes God's own description of himself from the book of Exodus, and he throws it back in God's face as an insult. He says he knew how compassionate God was and that he would find a way to forgive the horrible Ninevites, something that Jonah did not believe they deserved. And in a moment of extreme drama, Jonah says that he would rather die than live knowing that the Ninevites did not receive the punishment that he believed they deserved. And God responds to him with a question. God says, "Is it right for you to be angry?" Another translation puts it like this: "Does it do you well to be angry?" Let's take some time to pause and reflect on this. And as much as you are comfortable, discuss the following questions together as a group. Firstly, why do you think God asks Jonah this question? What do God's questions reveal about how he relates to us? And secondly, like Jonah, are there people or groups of people that you don't believe deserve God's mercy, grace, and love? Why don't you feel that they deserve it? And how might Jonah's story challenge this? It's easy to feel shocked by Jonah's disgust at God's mercy. But if you're anything like me, I see something of myself in Jonah. I can think of many times where I've witnessed something that I've seen as unjust and demanded that the perpetrators be held responsible. The last thing that I would want would be for perpetrators of injustice to go without punishment. And this story isn't really about whether or not people should be held accountable for their actions. The Bible tells us that clearly we all will. Rather, I encourage you to read the book of Jonah like a mirror. We're compelled as we do so to examine where our own response to people often looks very different to God's response to people. Jonah ignores God's question and he goes outside of the city of Nineveh and he camps on a hill and he camps there to wait and to watch. He wants to see what might happen to Nineveh and if they will, in fact, get the punishment that he believes they deserve. He's waiting to see if God will change his mind and not be compassionate and kind to the people. And what happens next is very strange. God provides a plant to shade Jonah from the sun, which Jonah's really happy about. Then God sends a worm to eat up the plant. So Jonah loses his shade, which he's not very happy about. And there, on the top of a hill in the heat of the sun, Jonah asks God to kill him. And God again asks Jonah, "Is your anger justified?" And Jonah responds with, "Yes, yes, it is. Let me die." And these are Jonah's last words. But it's God's final words that conclude the book. He says to Jonah, "You have compassion for this plant, for this tree that's provided you shade, and yet you have no connection to it. Should I not then have compassion on a city full of people who have lost their way? Are not humans more valuable?" God's intention in this whole strange scenario was to reveal Jonah's prejudice and his selective compassion, how Jonah prefers what is valuable and convenient for him individually. And Jonah's response to the people of Nineveh was entirely opposite to God's response, which reveals just how extravagant God's mercy, grace, and compassion is. Let's pause now again, and as much as you are comfortable, reflect on the following questions together as a group. Firstly, consider how Jonah goes to the hill to watch what happens. I wonder, how easy is it for us to sit at a distance and react to the world rather than actively participate in God's work of redemption? And secondly, think about Jesus' parable of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. You might want to turn there and read it together as a group. What parallels can you see between that story and this story of Jonah? And in what ways are we challenged by both stories? The book of Jonah holds up a mirror to the one who reads it. And in Jonah, we see the worst parts of our own character magnified. But just as God showed grace, mercy, and compassion to the Ninevites who had lost their way and to Jonah himself, he shows that same grace, mercy, and compassion to us through his son, Jesus Christ. And so this strange story about a man who runs away, encounters a storm, is swallowed into the belly of a fish, spat out, reveals to us the good news of Jesus and the wideness and extravagance of God's mercy and grace in every season of our lives. Thank you so much for joining us for this series on the book of Jonah.